So we're now going to be looking at other web services that sometimes occur with OPA. There's a variety of different web services, both for administrative and for execution purposes. And my goal here is not to go into immense detail over each of them, but to give you enough to understand what they're for. And then we'll have little video snippets demonstrating them, which you can watch after this slideshow. So let's talk about the different web services you have at your disposal. We are going to talk about assess, answer, interview, and we'll also talk about the REST services. There are a couple of REST-based services. All the others are SOAP. First of all, let's talk about assess and answer. Both of these can be considered as ways to access your interview without the HTML. If I remove the HTML layer, I can then simply talk about attributes and values and goals and all those OPA terminology things without having to worry about a user interface. So that's assess and answer. And they're probably the most common, and assess is definitely the most common one since it's been around pretty much since the word go. So the assess service is your typical request and response web service. You provide input information for your OPA attributes, and you get out goals to tell you that you've successfully calculated your benefits, or that you're going to lose your license, or whatever it is, one or more of the goals that were described in the Oracle Automation Policy Automation project. So it's a very straightforward thing because you can use it in Siebel as an outbound web service. You can provide inputs that have come from Siebel and get the answer back and then decide what to do with it. I can't think of any other web service in OPA that could be used in quite such a simple way in Siebel. It's your traditional request response, XML, SOAP, and is very straightforward to model in SOAP UI, and there's a little video showing you how to do it and how to get the WSDL as well, which is an important step. So getting the WSDL requires you to know a little bit about the OPA administration. So the video will show you that in order to get this WSDL, you need to specify that your OPA project is accessible as a web service and have permission to access it. Once you've got that, you can then go ahead and use it in SOAP UI. So there's a video to accompany this to use the assess WSDL, how to get it, how to use it. Moving on, what about the answer service? Now, the answer service is another request response mechanism, so it's typical SOAP XML. It's slightly different. It's based around the idea that it should only be used if your project in OPA has a connection. And there's the clue. So if you have a connection to Siebel, you could use this answer service, request and response, to test drive what's going to happen when you start connecting to Siebel. Basically, in your input and your output, you'll see lots of references to tables and fields. So it's almost part of the integration between Siebel and OPA, but it's good because you can use it to, as I said, essentially test the answer, the request and response from OPA using fake data, which doesn't yet have to be from Siebel. In Siebel, it's typically used in a multi-step process in the sense that there'll be different parts to the process. One part will be handling the initial request. The other part will be querying Siebel and then turning that into data and then dealing with how you respond. So we don't normally use this if we can use the assess service. I think that's a fair thing to say. But let's go and have a look as to what the answer service looks like in real life. Good news is there's a very short video coming up soon. In Siebel Tools, you can probably find some examples of this, especially if you've been working in Siebel IP15. There's one called PUB screening, which calls a subprocess. The subprocess actually does the hard work of converting Siebel structures into the OPA connection structures. So moving from integration objects and components into tables and fields. And it uses XSL. This should all sound very familiar if you've been working through the other examples. Essentially, the answer service is part of the mechanism that makes Siebel integrations work in a way. You could hard code some stuff and test it yourself in SOAP UI, and that's exactly what we're going to do in the video that you can watch after this. Because it's very table and field or integration object and integration component specific, Most of the time, for each of your new integration scenarios, you'll need a new workflow because you'll be dealing with different data. So if you want to, you can go off and view a very short video about how to access the Answer Web WSDL. The interview service is probably the most exotic one at this stage because it's something that was designed for a very specific purpose. First of all, it's a SOAP web service, but it's very different in scope. Its goal is to let a developer query OPA user interface elements. I'll be more specific. Suppose you wanted to build a new user interface for OPA. You have a project and you don't like the HTML interface. You want to build it in Objective-C, or you want to build it in Silverlight, or you want to build it in Java, or you want to build a mobile app in Android. I don't know. You want to replace the HTML interface with something else. But the prerequisite is that your new user interface has to allow the user to navigate in the way they're expecting, so next and previous, and your interface has to be able to handle all of the typical things like a user going backwards, a user removing information. So you have to be able to investigate what the changes that the user has made do to your goals and whether you've reached goals or not. The best way to see this in action is to go and look at Siebel IFE15 because we used it a lot in the integration. The video simply shows you how to start an interview, capture the session ID, and then use that session ID in all the other actions that form part of an interview service, because there are many different actions you can perform, but they need to be against a specific interview session ID. The final example is REST, which obviously is slightly different. So there are two basic things you can do with REST in OPA. You can do typical administrative tasks like looking at and working with deployments, users, permissions, and so on. And you also have a batch processing engine, which allows you to load up batch data in JSON and then push it into a batch processing engine, which is very high performance, and get back your data. Your goals, if you will. The second example is license-based, so you may not have permission to use it. And we've got a little video showing you how you can hook up the REST API to SOAP UI. What's different there is you'll need to authenticate and get yourself an authentication token to be able to use it. We'll show you how to do that. Obviously, in real life, you wouldn't use SOAP UI. I think, yeah, if I remember rightly, on the OPA Hub website, we have an example of where we used Visual Studio to grab the authentication code and use it to execute some stuff in Visual Basic. So that's it for our overview of the different services. A little bit out of scope, really, if you think about the title of this training seminar, but we wanted you to have the big picture too.